So thank you all for joining us as we continue our conversation of our Q&A panel here with our Alzheimer's Association experts. These were questions from our 2 spring conferences, our African American conference and our updates on dementia that never got answered, and we're going to answer them for you here online. And so I have with me today Stephanie Vonnegut, our family care specialist, Craig Wingate, our outreach marketing specialist, and Lisa Choquette, our helpline manager, who are going to help us with this next section as we talk a little bit about communication and behaviors. And boy, I think we would all agree, this is a conversation we have with caregivers all the time about dealing with some of these challenges. So I'm going to sort of open it up to kind of all of us to talk a little bit about this, because we know how challenging some of these frustrations can be for families. Lisa, let's start with you. What's your sort of couple of go-to tips for families that have to deal with these challenging behaviors?
Well, I'd say first of all is recognizing that behaviors are purposeful, and they sometimes happen when the individual who has dementia isn't able to accurately express how they're feeling or what's going on with them. So generally the behavior is to communicate something. If it's agitation or anxiety, anger, it may be there's some feeling of discomfort. They're having a hard time with figuring out their environment. So they're trying to communicate something to us. So our challenge is to figure out what that is. So generally it's looking at when the behavior occurs, what happened right before that behavior? What was the trigger to it? So we want to identify things like, does that behavior happen at a certain time of day? Does it happen in a certain place or environment? Who are the people around? What happened right before that behavior occurred? So if you can try to, analyze that a little bit and find some areas that maybe are occurring. Maybe sometimes, like I had a recent question about an individual who was noticing that her mother becomes agitated when the care provider attempts to help her with self-care. And what we found out is it's happening first thing in the morning. The care provider is coming into the room and waking her up and trying to attend to her needs. So we talked a little bit about, giving her mother some time to wake up gently, not launching right into personal care. If she said to me that her mother sleeps really soundly, sleeps like 8 to 10 hours a night. So there may be some stiffness, soreness, especially since her mother was 93 years old. So we talked a little bit about some gentle touch, maybe rubbing her hands a little bit, rubbing her feet, just talking to her a little bit before, launching into personal care. So that's kind of an example of what I would talk with families about.
Yeah, and I mean, that's just, if you think about it from the common sense perspective, think about what you would want if someone was coming in today to wake you up in the morning. That was great advice that you gave. So that's a great general overview of behaviors. We also got some very specific examples. So let's go through a couple of those. So Stephanie, I'm going to turn it to you to talk about what happens when you can't get someone in the shower.
This one's pretty common. I like to say for some folks, just try to make it a spa day, like pamper them, make it fun, prepare the bath in advance, make it warm, put the towels in the dryer so they're warm for everybody. Involve the person or have the person be involved as much as possible. Like Lisa was saying, these tasks were being done to this woman. So if the person with dementia can be involved in their own personal care, there can be less resistance. You can try rewards, saying, let's go take a shower and then we'll go to lunch or sit outside afterwards. So tie it to something nice and fun afterwards. So there are a lot of ways to work through it. Everybody's situation's different. I had a call once, not too long ago, and the person was also resisting bathroom care because she's a very modest person. And so we brainstormed ways to make sure that the person with dementia was maybe more covered when these activities were taking place. And that's where the helpline can be really helpful, because we can talk to you about individual situations, the different behavioral symptoms.
Yeah, I was going to say both you and Lisa gave really concrete examples of calls that you've had, and you know, the hope is that people watching this will know that those are the exact kinds of things that you guys take on a daily basis, is these really one-on-one scenarios of what's specifically happening in a family to be able to give some concrete tips. So don't hesitate to call 800-272-3900 and talk to one of our family care specialists or our helpline manager. So sort of following up on that, Stephanie, also thinking of, you know, you hear all the time about people that become incontinent, not because there's a medical reason, but that change in their ability to get to the bathroom on time, right? That functional incontinence. Do you have any tips for families that of people that just can't get to the bathroom on time?
Yeah, actually one thing that we suggest often is what we call a toileting schedule. So bring them to the bathroom every 2 hours, maybe hour and a half, and just get them into the bathroom so they can do their business. And that way, nobody has to fight or rush them to get into the toilet, because if you try to rush somebody with dementia, you're going to meet resistance. We have to be slow and patient. And so if you can get them on a schedule, maybe have clothes that are easy to remove, so stretch waists, you know, not things with buttons and zippers. Those can be helpful situations for incontinence.
We get a lot of questions about those repetitive questions, right? So I want to go home, I want to go home, I want to go home. Lisa, do you have suggestions for families on maybe specifically on the I want to go home piece? Because we had that come up a couple of times on questions, but then maybe we can talk about repetitive questions after.
So I think this goes back to, you know, trying to figure out why the behavior is occurring. Again, the behavior is purposeful. So in this case, you know, I would try to find out what does home mean to the individual, because going home doesn't necessarily mean to the home you're in, and that's what can be very frustrating for folks, is that they're caring for someone who's saying, I want to go home, and they're actually in their home. But it may be that they're thinking of a different place. They may be thinking of a home from childhood. They may be thinking of a sense of comfort. Maybe, you know, it's a new place that they're in, or they have something else that is different. They don't have their belongings that they are familiar with around them. So I would talk to, you know, ask some questions about, well, what is home like for you? What does home mean to you? And it may be just a sense of comfort, or it may be, you know, the individual is confused and doesn't recognize their home. So sometimes you have to use a little distraction. Sometimes it may be, well, let's go for a walk and see, you know, find home, or let's go for a drive to your home. And sometimes it's just driving around for a little while, doing something else, and then coming back to home. And you know, seeing the home may trigger it, or having that distraction,
that
having
redirection
something
into
fun
another.
to do can distract that.
Yeah, that's great advice. Craig, and I'm going to ask you all of this question, but we'll start with you. What advice do you have for a caregiver who's trying really hard to do all the right things that Stephanie and Lisa have talked to, but find themselves getting really frustrated?
Well, I would suggest, again, what Stephanie mentioned, self-care.
Yeah.
Definitely taking care of yourself, whatever that looks like, whether it's like taking a bath, giving yourself a pedicure, going for a pedicure, asking a friend or family member to come watch your loved one so you can like take a walk for 15 minutes to reduce the frustration and anger that may be occurring while caregiving. The second thing is those emotions are very natural, especially when you don't anticipate, you know, doing this, either for your spouse or for your parents. So not beating yourself up for having those emotions is definitely something you want to keep in mind, and you know, realizing that they're there and just sort of going with it, continuing, even though, and if you have to step out of the room because you're getting angry, just come back. I've heard caregivers say they've gotten so frustrated with their, you know, their mom or their dad because all of a sudden they were cursing them out. And one of the things that's been really successful is that, you know, the caregiver will leave the room and the person with dementia will calm down, and then the caregiver will return, and all of a sudden it's like, oh, a whole new day. So not taking things personally and having things just roll off your back, I think is the best advice.
Yeah, I always think about the 16-second delay rule, right? Whenever you see a live broadcast on television, there's always a 16-second delay, and that's to allow sensors time, right? Those 16 seconds can be really powerful if you can find a way to safely remove yourself. That's great advice.
Yeah.
Lisa or Stephanie, anything you would add to that?
Yeah, so I would say first of all is just recognizing when it's happening.
Yeah.
Because sometimes you may be in the midst of doing something with your loved one and you don't even realize the effect that you are becoming frustrated and angry. And a lot of times you can feel it physically. You start to get tense or get a headache, or feel yourself physically becoming tense. So I think sometimes it helps our brain to relax if we relax our body a little bit. So it may be just doing some mild stretching, just kind of, really releasing some tension, and that could be just walking out of the room for a few seconds to stretch and take a few deep breaths and to calm yourself before that frustration and anger gets out of control. And I think another thing can be, reframing the situation in your mind. If you have a few seconds to stop yourself and calm yourself, to recognize that if your loved one is having a challenging behavior, if it's difficult for you, this is the disease that's causing that behavior. It's not personal, and that it's really what's going on in the brain with, as we would say, you wouldn't expect a person who's blind to be able to read something. Sometimes you can't expect somebody who has dementia to be able to reason and act in a way that we think is rational. So it's kind of reframing that and recognizing that this isn't meant to be harmful to you, but it's really a matter of the disease itself.
That's great advice.
What I would tack on to what Lisa and Craig have said is don't expect perfection from yourself. Set realistic expectations for yourself and for your person with dementia. We're not looking for perfection, and you will get frustrated. As Craig mentioned, you can walk out of the room. If the person with dementia is safe, you can walk out of the room, stay out a couple of minutes, come back in, and they may have already forgotten what the issue was. So you can use that memory loss to your advantage.
Okay, so Lisa, let's talk about sleep. What happens when you know someone's tired, yet just getting them to go to sleep is a challenge? Do you have any advice for families on that?
Well, I think just one of the things you want to look at is sometimes for a person who they may be sleepy, or that may seem like they want to go to sleep, and if there's agitation occurring, that they don't want to go to bed, is again trying to figure out what that behavior is about. Are they in discomfort, pain? Do they need to use the restroom? Are they not comfortable? But also, even going back further is good sleep hygiene, even for, those of us who don't have dementia, is to get some physical exercise during the day, eat right, try to avoid any kind of foods that could cause any nausea or stomach upset. So, a lot of times what happens for people who have dementia, that they don't have the, maybe they've lost that motivation to be physically active. So that's where we encourage them and do things with them to encourage some activity during the day, so that at the end of the night or the end of the day, they actually are sleepy and physically sleepy. And again, trying to maybe limit some of the foods that may be causing an upset stomach, or and having something warm to drink before going to bed, like a nice cup of non-caffeinated tea or something like that, to kind of calm the person and have something enjoyable and creating a calm environment as well.
So Lisa, that was great advice. You talked about getting outside, but Craig, I'm going to turn it to you to ask. We also got a question about someone who won't go outside. So, someone who can't follow Lisa's advice because they won't, their loved one doesn't want to go outside. Do you have any thoughts about why that might be happening?
Yeah, there might be a number of reasons. A few being they might be afraid of falling, because with the disease, so many things get affected. Balance, hearing, vision, everything, because our brain essentially controls everything. So they may be afraid, or they might be more sensitive to audible like sounds, and it might be that they're, in terms of the heat and the sunlight, it might be too hot for them or too cold for them. So in terms of advice, maybe, playing detective, going on different times to see, if an evening outside is better than a stroll in the daylight. And also making sure you go with your loved one, make it sort of like an outing together, to sort of like continue that social engagement, that physical activity, and as well as sort of like that safety for them.
Yeah, so that's great advice. Stephanie, we often get the question about, when you have all of these challenging behaviors, is about how do we interact with that person with the disease without making them feel like you're the parent and they're the child, that you're sort of demeaning them a little bit. Do you have any advice for families around that one?
Yeah, I would say, try to remind yourself that this is your loved one with 60, 70, 80 plus years of life experience and wisdom behind them. And it's a disease process that is causing these changes, these symptoms. So if you can kind of remind yourself of that they're not doing this willfully. And then we know people with dementia, they're really good at mimicking the care partner's emotions. So as you maybe start getting frustrated, they get frustrated. So be really aware of your own emotions, and you pay attention to your nonverbal communication, because they get much better at reading that communication that's not words, as they lose their words. So pay attention to your body language, your tone of voice, and how you're saying things to them. And I would also tie in there that the self-care, again, is a big piece of that. So if you are taking care of yourself, you won't get as easily frustrated with them when they exhibit these behavioral symptoms.
Yeah, and you guys have given such great advice throughout here, and a lot of it we've said the words, if we know they're safe. So let's talk about safety for just a second, because that is such a big piece of some of these caregiver issues. Let's talk about wandering, and why, what happens with wandering and why it's such a concern for us. I'll let any of you take that one.
Well, 6 out of 10 people with the disease will wander. So it's a very big deal. People have wandered off to different states, different cities, and one of the things that I would suggest caregivers do is sign their loved ones up to our program, MedAlert Safe Return. It's a national program that a caregiver can sign their loved one up, so that if their information is put into a data bank or a database, and what happens is if they sort of wander off, first responders can then identify the loved one, because of, along with the program, individuals would get like a bracelet or some sort of emblem showing that they have Alzheimer's and they're part of the MedAlert Safe Return program. And it's saved many, many lives. It's brought caregivers and reconnected to their loved ones. So I would definitely encourage people to sign up for MedAlert Safe Return.
And Lisa, as our helpline manager, you're one of the staff that works with that program on overnight and weekday wanderings. Can you tell us a little bit about what you do when you take those calls? How are you there to help?
Okay. So when we receive the call, either from the family member or MedAlert Safe Return, lets us know that an individual is missing so that we can reach out to the family. So we will help in terms of, talking with the family about what occurred before the person left, give more specifics about their state of mind, and really gather as much information as we can to help them and to assist the police, if the police are hopefully out already looking for the individual, getting information to them. And then also for the family member, that we can coordinate with the police to be able to provide information on maybe what the person was wearing, providing more specifics about where they might be, so the family member can have their phone line open in order to receive a call if their loved one is found. And then once the person is found, we also work with the family on how to avoid the wandering, or maybe some tips for decreasing the risk of wandering in the future. We can also be involved while the person is missing, actively missing, getting the media involved to get out information to the public, so that we have more eyes out there who are looking for this individual who's lost, and will know to call the police if they see them.
Yeah, and you mentioned the police, you both mentioned the police. Stephanie, maybe you could talk a little bit about what we've been doing here to work with local police departments on educating them.
So we actually do have a first responder training that we can do for first responders, police officers, sheriffs, fire departments. And actually in our office here in San Jose, we've been inviting first responders to come take a tour of the office and learn about all our programs that we have. So then they go out and because they're seeing folks on a routine basis, provide information on the services that we can provide to them.
And as we sort of wrap up this segment, Craig, I'm just going to have you give our final thought. What would your one piece of advice be to anybody that's watching?
To not do this alone, to not be the maverick caregiver. So often caregivers decide to do this, take this all on their own, and they're up 36 hours and they're trying to be the best, and it's like, no, don't do that. Because research even shows that caregivers on that path tend to go before the person with the disease, and then what? Then there's no one to care for the person with dementia. So use your support systems, whatever that looks like, whether it's at a church, at a senior center, job, spouse, family, but definitely don't do it alone.
And thank you. That ends this segment of our program.